Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to this July 2nd, 2014 edition of Nightcast. I want to apologize to you for those that watch live for our missing the broadcast time tonight. I ran out to get some mocha just before broadcast and got caught by a long train that stopped. But there's a blessing in that, in a way, and that is when I had planned to open tonight with news from yesterday's European parliamentary new members, and I've got that video for you. But when I got back, I found that there's some news from Jerusalem that much more important we should open with. Clashes have erupted between Palestinian youths and Israeli police after the body of a Palestinian teenager kidnapped in East Jerusalem was found. The BBC's Christian Fraser has this report.
Well, this is the front line in East Jerusalem. We're on the Palestinian side. You can see these young Palestinians are throwing rocks that are littered around the floor. If you just spin around here, Jimmy, you'll see that someone's just delivered more rocks for this man to throw. And just up here, they've built this barricade. In fact, in the last few minutes, they manoeuvred a skip in place to try and give themselves some protection, because on the other side, on the roofs, there are snipers. There's a line of Israeli soldiers who have been firing rubber bullets at the Palestinians. And in fact, media crews have been hit this morning, one Palestinian crew and also one photographer who strayed too close. The air is thick with the smell of burning plastic. And over here, right on the front line, is the house of the young boy that went missing this morning, 17 years old. His mother Suha told me he disappeared on his way to the mosque, which is over here across the road. I want to just get a feeling of the anger that there is in this Palestinian community. Can I just talk to you? Just come over here. Tell us a little bit about this region, because we're very close to settlements, to an Israeli settlement.
Yeah, it's very bad. All of these guys, they are relatives, and they are boiling. They can't want to do. Imagine if this boy, he's Jewish, and killed. What can they do, the Jewish with us? What they did in Hebrew? What they did?
But as a mother, are you sad that children on both sides are dying in this conflict?
It's not fair, but we like peace. We love peace. But if somebody take your house, your land, your kids, imagine what can you do with them? Imagine. This is our life. Every day, this is our life. This is our life.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
As the lady says, this is the cycle of violence, this eye for an eye mentality that in this region can spill out of control.
Out of control, that's pretty well summarized there. You know, it's this thing's gotten much more complex. Whew, dear friends. Christian Fraser, thank you very much for that report. Well, friends, let's go on with the story from the European Parliament. Inside European Parliament with UKIP member of the European Parliament, Janice Atkinson. The UKIP won more seats at the European elections than any other UK party and has already caused controversy during the first session of the new parliament by staging a protest. The BBC's Graham Satchell spent day one with UKIP's newly elected member of Parliament of the European Parliament for the South East, Janice Atkinson.
They won the European elections, and for Janice Atkinson, it's her first day at the European Parliament, so you'd think she'd be happy.
No, we don't want to be here. UKIP do not want to be MEPs.
But they are, UKIP, the largest British party here, so a grand entrance. But it's all just a little uncertain.
Which door are we going to go to?
They find a door, but finding a new office proves a little more tricky.
I think I am number 42. We are on the 8th floor, aren't we? They're saying down there, but I think it depends on which lift we came up. This place is such a rabbit warren. Janice Atkinson. Hello, can I help you?
Janice Atkinson represents the southeast of England. She wants to create jobs and growth in her area, but first, she's flying the flag.
That will now go on my desk, I think. Just there.
And so to the first proper job of the day, electing a new president of the European Parliament, effectively the Speaker or Chairman.
There is a conundrum for UKIP here. Do they engage with this Parliament, try and change it from the inside, or do they ignore it, dismiss it?
The answer comes almost immediately. In a symbolic show of defiance, UKIP MEPs turn their back as the EU anthem plays.
Was that slightly childish?
No, it's actually demonstrating that we oppose it. I'm not going to acknowledge a foreign national anthem and a foreign flag that is claiming it has supremacy over our laws. No. OK, I've been locked out of the computer.
Back in the office, Janice is struggling to log in and she needs some help.
This is the wonderful Francesca who works for our group. She's Italian.
I am Italian indeed.
We're not xenophobic little Englanders, no, absolutely.
Janice has argued strongly against what she calls uncontrolled immigration from Europe, but says UKIP has been misunderstood.
We actually want the brightest and best from around the world, like an Australian point system, like an American system. So we choose who we want and the numbers we want.
Partly because of the success of UKIP, Britain is now at a crossroads with the rest of Europe. So, are we in or on the way out?
If there is a referendum in 2017, the pro-Europeans will tell us what Europe has done for us, things like cheaper mobile phone calls. And of course, there are huge things like free trade, the 3 million or so British jobs that depend on the European export markets, and of course, 70 years of peace.
For Janice, the dangers of coming out have been overblown.
Studies have shown that we can create 4 million jobs if we left the EU. We're not going to lose 3 million jobs. We'll actually create 4 million jobs because we're getting rid of red tape and bureaucracy from British businesses.
We can look forward to years of more arguments about our relationship with the EU. In the meantime, Janice and UKIP will continue to disrupt, to cause trouble at the heart of Europe. Graham Satchell, BBC News, Strasbourg.
Friends, that story should bring something out very interesting. You know, God gave wonderful blessings to the two sons of Joseph as promises, part of a big promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, who had 12 sons, one of them Joseph, who had 2 sons who carried Joseph's name. And those 2 sons are Ephraim, modern-day England, United Kingdom, and Manasseh, modern-day United States. The firstborn son of Jacob, Israel, is Reuben, modern-day France. And we've been speaking to you the last several nights as we've been explaining the Sykes-Picot agreement to set the border in the Middle East from the last E in acre to the E in acre to the last K in Kirkuk, and just a straight line that ignored the ethnicity and tribal arrangements in the Middle East and the problems that's causing. But old Ephraim and Reuben are having some engagement here related to the EU. Here's a picture of UK's Prime Minister David Cameron and the French President François Hollande together from yesterday at the European Parliament, where a lot of new members have been finding their offices. We'll have another story for you just a little bit in here, but I want to read you just a very short part of an article by the BBC's European editor, Gavin Hewitt, who says the British and French leaders may jostle over their commissioners' portfolios. Several have opined to Mr. Hewitt that a British exit from the EU would do as much damage to the EU as to the UK. One said a British departure would fatally wound the European project. In an expression of support, Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, said, historically, politically, democratically, culturally, Great Britain is entirely indispensable for Europe. Now, Mr. Hewitt said that he is frequently asked, what does David Cameron, actually want? And Mr. Hewitt replies he, of course, does not have to declare his negotiating hand until after the general election in May of next year, presuming he wins, and also, friends, presuming that we're all still here May of next year. But back to Mr. Hewitt's closing words. Mr. Hewitt says, but the expectation is that David Cameron will need some major concessions, either on immigration policy or returning some power to national parliaments. Other leaders believe the EU should act only where necessary, kind of a laissez-faire government approach that some administrations of the United States have had and shown well in. But Mr. Hewitt said that some believe that the EU should act only where necessary and national governments should act wherever possible. Mr. Hewitt goes on to close his article by saying, giving substance to such expressions will be long and tough. What seems more widely accepted than before is that if Britain is to stay in the EU, then other countries have to allow, quote, even closer union, end quote, to be interpreted differently. Ultimately, Mr. Hewitt says it is unclear whether Europe's leaders will agree that the EU would benefit from doing less and better, or whether closer integration is so closely wound into the DNA of the Union that meaningful reforms will struggle to be accepted. Friends, in our next story, the question is, how Eurosceptic is the new European Parliament? And we have some video we showed you part of the other night. We ran out of time, so I'm going to be sure you get to see it all here tonight before we go on to our other stories.
So after the drama last week involving the nomination of Jean-Claude Juncker as the next president of the European Commission, this week attention shifts to another European institution. We're in the European Parliament. Nigel Farage is just over here talking to some of his colleagues. And this desk over here is where new MEPs come and pick up their office keys. There are hundreds of new MEPs in this Parliament, and trust me, finding a way around this place can be pretty complicated. And this is where MEPs pick up their voting cards, and the first thing this Parliament's got to do is elect a president of its own, the Speaker of Parliament if you like, and guess what? It's going to be the same guy that it was last time, the German socialist Martin Schulz. The two main political groups in the Parliament have stitched it up between them. Political groups? Yes, MEPs don't sit in national delegations. They sit in pan-European groups that have to contain at least 25 MEPs from 7 different countries.
Friends, I'm just wondering if you noticed that comment. These MEPs sit in 10 different groups. Did you catch that?
The biggest group is the centre-right EPP with 221 MEPs. Then come the Socialists on 191. In third place, the ECR, including David Cameron's Tories with 70 MEPs. And then the Liberals on 67. There are 3 other groups in the new Parliament. But some parties, including Marine Le Pen's National Front, have so far managed to form no group at all. The Parliament is certainly more powerful than it used to be, and it still has a clear pro-European majority. But there are more Eurosceptic MEPs than ever before. Expect some robust debate here. Chris Morris, BBC News, Strasbourg.
Friends, I don't know if there's any significance to those 10 groups, but you know, according to the prophecy about a United States of Europe that becomes extremely federated, that will elect as its head what the Bible prophetically calls a beast, which will essentially be a new emperor, an Assyrian emperor, because God says he's going to use Assyria to punish Israel. It'll be a new Assyrian emperor, most likely coronated in Frankfurt, Germany, by the Pope, and will officially become the seventh and final head. Let's put that chart back up on our screen. It'll become the seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire, a revival of that Holy Roman Empire. And let's see, can I find the place on this chart that'll just summarize that real quickly? I got a lot of video to show you tonight, friends. But at the bottom right corner there, we've got the. I got these slides out of order. I'll find a way to zoom in on that next time we talk about it. But there, as was pointed out in the video, there are a lot of Eurosceptics, but there's still enough MEPs who are pro-EU that it's still a viable product to have a united Europe. Let's see. I did take a picture of this chart that relates to the. How many is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. At least 8 of those 10 different groups. And let's see what else we have. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. There's some other stories we want to cover. For those who are perhaps interested in it, here's a breakdown of the outline of authority within the present structuring of the EU. At the top of it, there's a European Council. National leaders, they set priorities, and then following that is a European Commission. And you know, they elect a leader of the European Council and they elect a leader of the European Commission. And they're still working it all out, and eventually it's going to have some real teeth to it. And again, the major point of what's happened yesterday, even though there are a lot of Eurosceptics, nonetheless, there's still a great pro-European, pro-EU membership within the European Parliament. Now, I do have one more video related to this European Parliament thing, and there's one thing I didn't want to allow to happen, friends. With all that's been going on in the Ukraine and then in Iraq with the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIS or ISIL, and we got more. We got some stories on that maybe spin your head just a little bit tonight. But I didn't want us to miss what's happening in Europe, because we definitely want to be keeping our eye on the shaping. And right now, new members are coming in that'll have a lot to do with shaping how the EU goes. And I've got a video you may find, this is kind of interesting and it's also educational. 3 members of the European Parliament in this video talk about why they wanted to be an MEP.
I tried to be a MEP because I wanted to destroy this nest of bureaucracy, because there is no greater enemy of Europe than the European Union. There was no greater enemy of Russia as Soviet Union. There was no greater enemy of Germany than the Third Reich, and there is no greater enemy of Europe than European Union. I like to be hated by those men, because the hate of them is a great success of mine.
They cannot ignore that 52% of the citizens in Europe are female. So we are a majority. We cannot be handled as a minority. It's not worthy a modern Europe to have to not have gender equality, to have discrimination because of your gender. It's not a modern democratic Europe to have a discrimination because of ethnicity or disability or sexual orientation. So, and I think this is what we have to make a change, and I think it's possible. I have a good belief. If I wouldn't have it, I wouldn't candidate to be an MEP from the beginning.
This is my small new office as a new MEP here. It's with a table, big table, nice view. It's with a personal computer, and what's interesting, there's a television where I can see the parliament. In my former life, I was an engineer. I work in a big company in Saxony-Anhalt, and so now I'm an MEP. It's completely different to my first life, and so the first challenge here is that I understand all the things what I see here every day and every week. So what I don't like is that you have to be a lot of time in a year here in Strasbourg or in Brussels, and so I have only 4 or 5 weeks in a year where I can be at home in Saxony-Anhalt in Germany and talk with the people there about my work.
Now, friends, the 2009 Lisbon Treaty gave the European Parliament an equal role with the Council. Let me see if I can back this up just for a moment. And let me just, if you can see this okay, I hope so. I'll just pull that forward in case anybody of you want to eyeball it while I explain a couple things to you here. The 2009 Lisbon Treaty gave the European Parliament an equal role with the Council ministers from EU governments in enacting EU legislation. This co-decision covers nearly all policy areas, including the EU budget. MEPs, members of European Parliament, also play a key role in overseeing the EU's foreign policy arm, the European External Action Service, and other EU agencies. In September, MEPs will vet, V-E-T, they'll vet candidates for the Commission, the 28-member executive arm which initiates EU laws. Parliamentary approval is required for the new Commission to take office. Now, what's happening of late? Jean-Claude Juncker, career insider or committed European. Now, this video I have for you aired on June 27. The man at the center of the controversy that's going on right now, Jean-Claude Juncker, is a former Prime Minister of Luxembourg and one of the architects of the euro. And friends, I should say the controversy that was going on as of, end of June, he's been voted in there. Now that he's been voted in for the top job at the European Commission, how is the EU likely to work under his leadership? Now, at the time of this video, he was only a nominee. And how will Britain work with him? European editor Gavin Hewitt does a pretty good job of informing us about Mr. Juncker in this video.
Some of the judgments came early. One German paper described David Cameron as the loneliest man in Europe. And some of Europe's leaders had a blunt message for Britain.
I think in the UK, some people really seriously need to wake up and smell the coffee.
The Prime Minister told the other leaders that they would regret backing Mr. Juncker, but they defended him.
Uns einen Kommissionspräsidenten gibt. I think the decision for Jean-Claude Juncker is a decision that will allow us to have a Commission President who has European experience and who is willing to accommodate the wishes of individual member states as well as the wishes of the European Parliament.
The German Chancellor appeared to reach out to Britain. She said that ever closer union did not mean a one-speed Europe. She specifically said that she shared some of Britain's concerns about what a modern Europe should look like. That message, that Mr. Juncker is open to reform, is being pressed by senior German politicians.
Jean-Claude Juncker said he is open for proposals coming from London, how to reform the European Union, how to cut red tape, how to make the European Union more efficient.
None of these words, however, could disguise the bitter divide over Mr. Juncker. David Cameron sees a career insider whose election undermines the power of national parliaments. The German Chancellor sees a committed European. Among the leaders here, there was anxiety that this defeat for David Cameron could hasten the exit of Britain from the EU. Even so, there was a note of frustration from the French president, who said that Britain had to play by the same rules as others.
Whenever David Cameron speaks, it's quite legitimate to understand and to hear what he's saying. But at the same time, in Europe, we need to learn to live together in a framework of rules and treaties. There's no other way out.
But after David Cameron had spoken, many leaders expressed sympathy with his arguments, even though they did not support him. The leaders did add a paragraph to the final communiqué stating that Britain's concerns about the future direction of Europe will need to be addressed. But Mr. Cameron will find himself having to deal with a man he doubted could deliver reform. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Brussels.
Friends, you know, as the French President François Hollande spoke, the leader of modern-day Reuben, you know, and he was in favor of these treaties, and you know, we got to do what these treaties say and all that. You know, it's amazing how France forgets history, and in alliances France has made with Germany, time and time again, Germany stabs France in the back, and of course, what the French leader may not understand at this moment in time is that eventually the head of this EU pact that's going to become a full-fledged federation is going to be a German emperor that they'll all give their power to in some event or situation that just triggers off something where they really need a real strong man in there. Strong man, strong woman, but you know, the leader, a strong leader, is going to be a German leader. Now, for the UK, problem is for a nation that was once Great Britain, ruling where it was said that the sun never sets on the British Empire. Great Britain, the people of the UK are not obeying. The problem is the people of the UK are not obeying their creator. They, like the people of the United States, have rejected their creator and his ways. America prints on its money, "In God we trust," which, as the old joke goes, is often interpreted as "In this God we trust," meaning the money itself as the God that we trust. As Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, the two blessing and cursing chapters of the Bible, tells us, as God states in both of those chapters, again, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, you obey me and you get my blessings. You disobey me and you get just the opposite of the blessings, or in other words, curses. Blessing means, as God describes it, he says, I'll make you the head, not just one among many commonplace nations. What do you do in the UK want? I know you got a referendum that's going to be coming up, but do you want to be the head, or do you want to just be one of many? Actually, that second option is not the option. God says, obey me and you will be the head not the tail. But he says, if you do not obey me, you'll be not just one among many other equals, but you'll be the tail, at the bottom, in the pits, so to speak, and either in captivity or killed by sword of war. War today means destruction by nuclear bombs that can lay waste to whole cities in one fell swoop. In one nuclear bomb blast, whole cities can be blazed or razed to the ground. It's skyscrapers becoming ground scrapers, and its inhabitants all killed. And should any individuals remain in the suburbs, they'll soon after be taken captive, if not outright killed, by the Assyrians, whom God says he will use to punish the modern-day nations of Israel, which the UK and the US are being largely and mostly, except for a growing number of illegal immigrants, are the descendants of Joseph and his two sons, Ephraim as the UK and Manasseh as the US. Now, in another video, friends, Prime Minister David Cameron said it was a bad day. Let me see, let's tell you when. This was Friday. This is a video from this past Friday. This is Wednesday night. So backing up Tuesday, Monday, Sunday, Sabbath, Saturday, then Friday. Just before the weekend, on Friday, Prime Minister David Cameron said, after Jean-Claude Juncker was confirmed in the role of European Commission President, David Cameron said it was a bad day for Europe. EU leaders gave their backing for the former Luxembourg leader by 26 votes to 2 at a meeting in Brussels.
Now, on the Commission President, from the outset, I've been clear where I stand on this issue. I firmly believe in the principle that the European Council should be the one to propose the candidate. And if you believe in a principle, you should stand up for it. That is why I stood firm in my opposition today. I believe that by working together, we could have found an alternative candidate who commanded the support of every member state, agreeing together on the best way forward. That has been the practice the EU has followed on every occasion until today. And I think it's a serious mistake that other leaders decided to abandon that approach today. And it's why I insisted that the European Council took a vote. If the European Council, the elected heads of government, are going to allow the European Parliament to choose the next President of the European Commission in this way, I wanted it on the record that Britain opposed that. The Council voted to nominate Jean-Claude Juncker as the next President of the European Commission. Britain and Hungary opposed. We must accept the result, and Britain will now work with the Commission President, always do, to secure our national interest. But let me be absolutely clear. This is a bad day for Europe. It risks undermining the position of national governments, it risks undermining the power of national parliaments, and it hands new power to the European Parliament.
And friends, as we start to wrap up and close up for tonight, there's a story that relates to the fourth seal from Revelation 6, the fourth seal being depicted there as a pale horse whose rider is named Death, alongside whom Hades, hell, the grave, rides. And the primary characteristic of this horse and its deadly rider, named Death, as described in plain language by Jesus Christ, as the gospel writers wrote it up in a Greek word, loimos. Matthew, Mark, and Luke having written this, meaning pestilence, disease epidemics, the plagues of Egypt. There's a big jump in MERS cases that have been reported. More than 100 more cases and 34 deaths from the new respiratory disease MERS, M-E-R-S. MERS coronavirus have been reported by officials in Saudi Arabia. The cases date back to February and came to light after an analysis of hospital records. The World Health Organization, WHO, says there have now been 820 cases of MERS and 286 deaths. The exact source of the novel infection is still uncertain, but camels are a prime suspect. Do we have the picture of that? Yeah. The virus is, and problem is, the camels being prime suspect in Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, they eat them over there and they drink their milk. And if you take a look at God's Word, if you put the Quran aside, which the Vatican helped to write, the Vatican, several times, it's a known fact, they've tried to burn the Bible, and then when they couldn't get them all burned, they tried to prevent their patrons from using the Bible and hold their services in the Latin language so that none of the patrons really understood. And they would keep people from reading the Bible, and they tried to add some books to the Bible that were not canonized as part of the Bible. And the Bible, very clearly, there are a couple of chapters that tell you, just like the blessing and cursing chapters, there are a couple of chapters that tell you which are the clean meats you can eat and which are the meats that you should not eat. And I believe one of those is going to be Deuteronomy 14, Leviticus 28, I think. Do I have that right? Let me just take a look. I may have it backward, but if I can find one of them for you. Deuteronomy 11 and Leviticus 14, that's where they are. God tells us that the camel is unclean for human consumption, and yet they're doing that. And so they're getting this virus over there, and it's spreading around the world because once the people get it, you don't have to eat the camels anymore. You can just be around a person that has this respiratory virus, and you can pick it up from them. The virus is from the same family as the common cold, but can lead to kidney failure and pneumonia. It was first detected in June 2012, and already, friends, it's starting to escalate in its growth, much more than they thought it would grow. The update from the Saudi authorities said there were 113 additional cases, 76 of the patients recovered, 3 are still in the hospital, and 34 have died of those new cases. Cases have also been confirmed in Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, France, Germany, Italy, Tunisia, Egypt, the UK, and the US, usually after travel to Saudi Arabia. Researchers believe the coronavirus that causes the infection crossed over from the animals. Earlier this month, a report in the New England Journal of Medicine found identical MERS viruses in camels and their owner. However, the link had not been conclusively proven, and some researchers argue that there may be another source. The figures do show that nearly half of the cases were spread between people. It seems to have spread after close contact with family members or medical staff. The World Health Organization, WHO, does not recommend restrictions on trade or travel, but does warn people to avoid. Sometimes there's a little humor in the news, friends. They warn people to avoid raw camel milk, camel urine, and to ensure meat is properly cooked. Friends, let me just remind us again. God's Word says, don't eat camel meat. Now, what is MERS? MERS. It's an acronym for ME, Middle East, RS, Respiratory Syndrome. MERS, MERS. ME, Middle East, RS, Respiratory Syndrome. It's a type of coronavirus which causes respiratory infections. The first death was recorded in 2012 in Saudi Arabia. Camels are suspected to be the primary source of infection for humans. All right, friends, I got just a couple more stories before we wrap up tonight. Japan paves way for military to be able to fight overseas. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced the country's defense force will now be able to fight overseas, something it has not been able to do since the end of World War II, 1945. Under Japan's constitution, it is barred from using force to resolve conflicts except in cases of self-defense. China, with whom Japan is currently engaged in a bitter territorial dispute, says it opposes the change, accusing Japan of re-militarizing under Mr. Abe. The BBC's East Asia editor, Michael Bristow, reports.
Japan has an impressive and large military, but up until now the constitution has limited its role to defending the country. That's now changed. Its armed forces will be able to help an ally and perhaps fight abroad. Japan's cabinet approved a reinterpretation of the constitution imposed on the country after its aggression in the Second World War. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says threats from China, Japan's main regional rival, and North Korea have forced the change. He said Japan simply wanted to be better prepared, but would not fight foreign wars. Not everyone's convinced, though. Many in Japan worry the country could be drawn into a conflict.
For 70 years, Japan has kept peace with its constitution. What are we to do with our Prime Minister trying to trample over the precious constitution?
China and South Korea were also concerned. A foreign ministry spokesman in Beijing said Tokyo must respect his country's sovereignty and security. Japan's main ally, America, and some East Asian countries want a more engaged Japan to help resist a rising and increasingly assertive China, but that might make East Asia a more dangerous place. Michael Bristow, BBC News.
Thank you, Michael. And friends, you know, during Round 2, as Mr. Armstrong puts it, we're only between rounds of World War. You know, they're not separate wars. It's one big World War. We had Round 1 between 1914 and 1918 with the treaty to end it, signed in 1919. Then we had a long recess. And in 1936, just before Round 2 of World War started, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia and claimed to have revived the old Holy Roman Empire, and Mr. Herbert Armstrong, who was 44 years old at that time and whom God had began working with 10 years before that point in time, God began working with Mr. Armstrong as his end-time servant and apostle. He began working with him in 1926. 10 years later, after God having proved that Mr. Armstrong would faithfully obey him and even keep God's laws, including the annual holy days, when he and his wife did not understand what they meant. They simply understood that God required that you keep them, and they kept them for 7 years without knowing what they meant. And then after 7 years, God said, you're going to be faithful. Here's what these days mean. And then they were able to give the meaning of those days to the rest of us on just a silver platter. We come in not having to keep them wondering, what do these days mean? The meaning of those days are explained to us when we come in as a first fruit, part of the elect, part of the spring harvest, those who are called to that. Not everybody is, and we shouldn't put down those who are not. Those who are not called to the spring harvest will not have to overcome Satan, who will be put away at the time of their calling, which can be a wonderful blessing for people, because overcoming that vicious enemy that God compares to a lion, a ferocious lion who seeks whom he may devour. And it's a good idea not to get too awful alone by yourself, because lions like to seek prey that are alone. But God showed Mr. Armstrong in 1936, after proving him, he showed him that Mussolini was the sixth head of that revived Holy Roman Empire. And I got to fix these slides so I can zoom in. You see, I've revived my main background slide, and on the right side of it over there, I've got the first 5 kings that Revelation 17:10 talks about. Those 5 are fallen, and one is. And then right there in that little section where the sixth head is, I've got that. I got a picture of Mussolini. I got a picture of the other 5 that are fallen up above that, and I'll fix that so we can zoom in on that, friends, so you'll be able to see that part of the slide close up. But in 1936, one is. The timing, the present tense timing of Revelation 17:10 was 1936. That being written for our day. And as those of you who are familiar with the writing of Daniel, Daniel said, God, what is all these things you're talking about in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 and 8? What do all these things mean? God said, go your way, Daniel. This book is sealed until the time of the end, when knowledge would be increased and when people would travel to and fro. Well, here we are in those days right now, with knowledge increased and with transportation, where people can go to and fro like never before. The modern car, freeways to and fro, jet aircraft. People can be in different countries in a matter of a few hours and come back same day even. And we're in those last days that Daniel would have loved to have known what these things mean. And that verse in Revelation 17, verse 10, was written with the time frame of 1936 as the present tense of that verse, where it says 5 are fallen. One is, speaking of the heads of the end time Roman Empire. 5 are fallen, one is. The one that is in 1936 until 1945 was Mussolini. And then on April 28, 1945, when Mussolini was strung upside down, well, that ended that sixth head of the Holy Roman Empire, put its short life, and not all that glamorous life, but short-lived. It put it back into the pit again. And the rest of that verse, Revelation 17:10, says, and one is yet to come. One final head of the revived Holy Roman Empire is yet to come. That's the 7th head that is pictured as having 10 toes in Daniel 2 or 10 horns in Revelation 17. And those 10 horns will be the same as those 10 toes of Daniel 2. There'll be 5 from the east, the 2 legs representing east and west Roman Empire divisions. 5 from the east, 5 from the west. They'll either be regions or region states or something like that, or even groups that the European Union divides up somehow. And whether England will stay in there or not, that remains to be seen. Whether Reuben, France, will stay in there or not, one of the sons of Israel, that remains to be seen. But during the time of that 7th head, those 10 countries will give their power to what the Bible calls a beast, that 7th emperor, head of a revived Holy Roman Empire, likely to be coronated in Frankfurt, Germany, by the Pope, who coronated the Holy Roman Empire heads. And you know, Europe is having immigration policy arguments, and in the news of late, the United States has been having those kind of arguments. And I want to cover this story before we go. The border fence between Nogales, Arizona, and Sonora, Mexico, is in the news. President Barack Obama has directed immigration sources. Let's see, do I have video on this? No, I just got some. I just have some not video, but I have some slides on it. President Barack Obama has directed immigration resources toward the U.S. border with Mexico. There's a lot of stories about what the president has been doing about immigration, but in this story from Monday, this is a story from 2 days ago, the U.S. president announced on Monday he will use his own powers to, quote, fix as much of our broken immigration system as we can, end quote. Now, you know, that brings up a whole nother issue beside the issue of immigration. The president deciding on his own that he'll fix much of what is broken, our broken immigration system as we can. The move, according to this story, comes as Republicans told Mr. Obama a sweeping immigration bill passed by the Senate last year will not see a vote in the House this year. The U.S. has seen a sharp increase in the number of children trying to cross illegally into the United States. From October 2013 to June 15, 52,000 unaccompanied children arrived on the U.S. border with Mexico. Friends, let me put this slide up just for a moment. I need to take a sip of water. I'm losing my voice. If you'll pardon me, hold on just a moment. Okay, thank you very much. Speaking at the White House on Monday, Mr. Obama said this humanitarian crisis, as he called it, showed why he could not stand by and do nothing. You know, friends, another excuse to flex his arm when he's really just the head of the executive branch of the government. It's supposed to, the United States, not a perfect government, but at least it was designed to have checks and balances. And here we've got a man that people just sit back and allow to violate the checks and balances. But many of the recent arrivals are coming by train and are coming from the south from further south in Central America. The Senate bill that they were talking about passed last year in a 68-32 vote includes a path to citizenship for an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants, billions in new funding for border security, and a startup visa for foreign entrepreneurs. The shift in border resources will effectively mean more deportations for those who have recently crossed the U.S. border illegally or who are considered dangerous, but fewer deportations for those in the interior of the country. In addition to the transfer of staffing, Mr. Obama said he was staffing south. Mr. Obama said he was directing the Secretary of Homeland Security and the U.S. Attorney General to come up with recommendations about what he could do within his presidential powers to improve the U.S. immigration system. You know, some news reports are saying, look, Mr. President, the United States people don't trust you. You know, he should really sit back. But here's what he says. He says, I've sent a clear message to parents in these countries not to put their kids through this, Mr. Obama said of the increased number of children arriving at the U.S. border unaccompanied. You know, friends, all right, I'm on that one, I'm not going to say anymore. But I do have an article before we go. Let me see, how much time do we have here? Let me just take a look, see where we are. All right, I have just a few moments that we can do this. An article written by Mark Mardell, who is the North American editor for the BBC. Let me get the photo that applies to this. He's written an article called Not Going It Alone. Obama's recent foreign policy speeches have stressed regional partnerships. Now, this relates to Iraq. The Obama doctrine set out at West Point appears to be in tatters, according to Mr. Mardell, as Iraq falls apart. The critics have been quick to point to what's happening there as another sign of the weakness of his foreign policy. But Mr. Mardell says there's another way of looking at it, that being that he's right. Here's the case for the prosecution, that in his haste to proclaim the war over, he pulled U.S. troops out before the Iraqi government was ready to go it alone. He failed to reach a meaningful military deal with the country. He's taken his eye off the ball, done little to encourage civil society and a more balanced political solution. He's not led the world in identifying a looming crisis and crafting a coherent response. Friends, I think, I want to show you a video, so I think we can sum it up this way. Few people really understand the issue that really goes back thousands of years, the Ishmael-Isaac issue. And the Vatican, as we pointed out to you, the former Jesuit priest Alberto Rivera has revealed secret documents from the Vatican have shown that the Vatican helped the Arab people create Muhammad and the Quran and fostered that lie that Abraham took Ishmael up on the mountain, that God asked Abraham to take Ishmael up on the mountain and sacrifice him, and then promised the land to Ishmael's descendants. When no, the Holy Bible tells it, God's word says God had Abraham take Isaac up on that mountain. And friends, we're close to an hour, so there's a picture of some Iraqis as the president did his speaking in June at the West Point. But we only have a few minutes, so what can I show you here? Let me go very quickly to this video, friends. This is going to be potluck. Let's see what we got.
America's tallest building, the Sears Tower, has been hit by lightning 3 times during a severe thunderstorm that's battered Chicago. The tower, 108 stories high, bore the brunt of the electrical strikes during a spectacular storm that lit up the city skyline. The spectacle was caught on camera as a violent line of storms brought tornado warnings, torrential rain and high winds last night.
Friends, that story came out the same day that pictures were put in the news of a couple of 2 sets of men being married to one another, and they're both shown in the photographs kissing one another, something that God says in His Word is an abomination. And friends, there's that, as you heard, that same day, lightning struck from the heavens, hit the tallest building in the United States repeatedly, 3 times in a row. And right now there's something we're keeping an eye on. It's off the coast, on the east coast of the United States, off land, over the waters. Hurricane, I think it's called. It starts with an A. I think it's Albert. We'll be keeping an eye on that. We're praying it doesn't come inland. But a good warning, that thing was. Let me roll that again in the background. A good warning that lightning strike
America's tallest building.
Friends, for the people of the United States to repent of our abominations before the Creator and of disobeying God, who says, if you obey me, you get blessings. You're the head, not the tail. One of you chase many of your enemies. You'll be the lender, not the borrower. And just the opposite, if we don't obey. You'll be the tail, not the head. The enemies will chase you. I'll break the pride of your power. And that's what we're seeing like in Iraq, where the jihadist military group ISIS have taken over the United States tanks and weapons that were left behind, and they're sporting them. And then the United States is slow to help Iraq, and the Iraq buys Russian planes. Oh, if you don't see that as a slap in the face of the United States and the pride of our power, and that's from the great God. Take a look at Leviticus 26, verse 19. We're out of time, friends. Thank you for joining me tonight. God willing, Creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Thursday night, with more current day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.